Breaking news. This just in. It's kind of huge, but I just learned that people, Pinaki, love to succeed. I don't know if you've heard it. Yeah, and it's the reason why, because people love to succeed so much. I think it's the reason when we're kids, we get like participation medals for losing, and there's a sense that nobody loves to fail or to lose, or and I feel like this relationship with failure kind of starts at a really young age, and how we're raised to understand what failure is. Would you not agree? Like, I think, like for me, I think failure it really does start at a very, very young age, and then I think it carries through for us the rest of our lives.
Absolutely. I think we're taught at a very young age, like how wrong it is to fail, or how we can't fail at things, and it comes out of a place of true heart and care, with our parents. But it is so true. Like when we're like young, we're expected to make messes, but at some point in time, we gotta like not be able to fail, right? And like it's it's funny. I get to watch this. As I don't know if you know about this, but I'm like or I don't know if the audience knows about this, but I have 3 kids, and the age gap is really wide. Like my oldest is 24 and my youngest is 3. And it's now as like a little bit of an older parent than most. I get to see like younger parents with their first children hanging out with my young children. And, it's very scary being a first time parent. You don't know what's happening. You don't know like what to expect, what's normal and not normal and whatnot. So there's a lot of fear in that. And it's interesting how like that fear starts to, come across and adapt. And, so yeah, we're afraid of falling, or afraid of, not being able to talk, or afraid of, eating too much or eating too little and all of that stuff. And, that affects everyone right around you, even the way you communicate. Right. So I agree with you in that.
And it always strikes me as, I remember my classmates when I was a kid, the athletes are the ones that love sports and would eventually become fairly high-performing athletes, or at least part of varsity teams when they would get older. They were the ones that would come into the classroom and they had Band-Aids on their knees, or sometimes they would come in with their arm in a sling and things like that. And there was those kids, but then you had other kids that clearly they were very cautious. They would avoid injury. And I've always wondered how that extrapolates generally in life, in terms of some of the kids that are just out there and a little bit more adventurous and courageous. And it always feels like kids at an early age, it's just useful to embrace the constructive, productive, and I guess instructive qualities of failure. I didn't do that on purpose, by the way. But,
did you just create something really whole poetic. New right there? Like
it sounded really poetic, but I think it's useful so that they can help understand how important that failure really is in this long journey to success.
It's true. Like I was thinking about this topic, as we were getting into it, and failure has like a very dear place in my heart, because for a number of reasons. I thought I'd share a story with you. Have you ever heard of Humans of New York? The blog, the photo blog, right? So, Brian Stanton created this photojournalistic blog in like the early 2010s. I think it was like 2011 or something like that. But it's like a huge phenomenon, right? Especially in like the East Coast, in the United States, right? Like he's, published books on it. But I was on one of the photos, and the story is really interesting, and it makes me think about failure a lot. So, my family and I were in New York City. We're in Uptown, and Brandon Stanton approaches me. I didn't know him, didn't know the blog at the time, and he told me what he does and asked if he could take a picture of me, and I was like, sure. And then he asked me, what's the scariest thing you've ever done? And I told him, I had a daughter at the age of 21. That was really, really scary for me, and then he asked me, how did that turn out? And so I pointed to my family that was right there. And I just said, pretty damn good. And then he said, you know what, we're going to take a photo of you and your family. And, that's going to be, like the caption of the thing. And I was like, all right, cool. I didn't know, again, much about it. I started looking at it after, for example, like, wow, there's quite a people following this. And then about a week later, it was posted and 70,000 likes and 50,000 comments were on that post. And it was, as I'm reading through them, it was really heart-filling, right? There was comments from a lot of young parents who felt something from that post and from that little statement, and it gave them hope, right? So even for me, I reflect back on it from a long time ago, what felt like a mistake was in fact exactly what I needed to be where I am, right? Like having a child at a young age gave me purpose like no other. And I'm not telling anyone here to go have children to get a purpose or anything like that. But it's just the way you view the things that happen in life gives you an opportunity to move ways like you wouldn't have otherwise. Right, if not for my daughter, I wouldn't have the family that I have today. And I wouldn't have the company that I have today. I wouldn't have the life. This podcast wouldn't be here. So, as I say this story, let me just take a moment to thank you, Maya. I love you and I'm super proud of you. And I think just from a personal standpoint, I thought that was like a deep story of how life works, right? It's how humans evolve, right? We see failure, but we could look at it as a challenge, right? A challenge that's inevitably going to help us grow. And so it's a gift. So to say failure is a gift, that's a hard pill to swallow, though.
I love that story so much, Pinaki. It's absolutely, it's so inspiring. And I think parenthood, whether you are 21, 31, 41, it is a terrifying idea because the stakes are so high and the prospect of failure is always there. But I think what's really useful for everyone to understand is that the whole process of parenthood and raising a young person into this world, it is fraught with a lot of micro failures and sometimes bigger failures along the way as well. And so that's why I'm excited about today's episode. So welcome everyone to today's episode is why does it feel so wrong to fail? And why does it feel so wrong to fail? I think is one that I've been looking forward to this episode for a while, Pinaki, and I'm excited to talk about it. But I do want to welcome everyone to our podcast. This is Why Does It Feel So Wrong to Be Human at Work? And I'm Chris Lee from Gallagher Communications, and I'm joined here by Pinaki Kathiari from Local Wisdom, and we're both we both have the shared passion of helping our clients deliver great employee experiences. And what we do really in each episode is we try to talk about things in the workplace that kind of feel wrong, or at least not really thought through. And these are things that either Pinaki, you and I have experienced firsthand, or things that we've seen when sometimes working with our clients, or working directly with our colleagues, or often just even reading about from some really impressive authors that, over time we've mentioned a lot of them on this podcast. And so that's why we're here. That's why hopefully, you're joining us on this podcast is we want to take a closer look at some of the practices that sometimes feel really outdated and start to question, does this even actually make sense? And we're not saying that you and I, Pinaki, have all the right answers, but we always look at this as somewhat of a safe space, even though we might say things that we'll regret later in social media, who knows. But this is the whole thing, is that we want to feel comfortable and hopefully inspire people to ask the tough questions and maybe provoke a different way of thinking about things. And so we thank you for joining this journey, and why don't we get right into it?
It's funny because in a previous episode, I made a mistake, and I said the title of this podcast is "Why Does It Feel So Human to Be Wrong at Work?" And I'm not sure if it's going to be edited out at the end of it all, but I felt like it was like the perfect introduction to this episode. Like, why does it feel so human to be wrong at work? Because humans, we're just known to make mistakes, right? So let's dive into that. Errors, failures, decision making, stress. What's the good, bad, ugly behind this, right? So, yeah, like, why does it feel so wrong to make mistakes, Chris? You want to start us off here?
We started off by talking about this at the top of the podcast. And I know that the corporate culture in a lot of workplaces has evolved quite a lot from when I was younger in my career. And I do feel like there's a little bit more empathy in today's workplace. I think we've really seen a lot of growth in how leaders think about what their role is. And Pinaki, you and I, we've referenced this work out of MIT Sloan a couple of times. But really what I want to talk about is the eroding style of leadership, which, the old school way of thinking about things was the manager, the boss, would be top down. It would be permission based, command and control. And there was a fear of making mistakes. There was a fear of reprisal. There was a fear of, if I mess this up, I'm not going to be in line for the next promotion. And so there was this weird underpinning of trying to achieve perfection and not show any sort of vulnerability in any of the work that we do.
Yeah, I seen that often, and I think you're right. It is getting like better, and like I'm seeing like trends of like folks being more like lenient on that, especially like leadership to kind of like give that slack, and I commend that. But it's certain times I hear stories and things, especially because I'm like speaking. I have this like one workshop, and it's about creative problem solving, and it's fun. It involves paper airplanes, super fun. That's a whole other topic. But one of the exercises in the workshop, right, I get everyone to think about bad ideas. It's really interesting to kind of draw out ideas from parts of our brain that we don't normally go to for ideas. And I've given this workshop multiple times. People walk out with like ideas that like actually help them solve specific problems that they have. They have a great time doing it. I've heard back like a few times that like, how an idea has helped someone actually change their business or mindset. And I've seen this exercise being like replicated by others. But the last time I did this, I'm hanging out with people afterwards. One person, this person was from a big consulting company, and they told me that I had someone else come in to do a similar exercise. And when thinking about like bad ideas or wrong ideas, she said one of the executives commented, no, we can't do that. We don't have time for bad ideas. And I understand where that thought comes from, but like, wow, like, what do you think of philosophies like that? And I have a perspective, but maybe we'll start with you first, Chris.
I mean, it's challenging because I think the pursuit of perfection gets in the way of creativity, innovation. One of the things that my wife Sydney and I, we try really hard to do with our kids is to help them appreciate that failure is such a big part of success. And one thing that I'm sure my kids are sick of hearing me say this, but
Papa lecture.
That but the whole idea that some of the least successful people in the world have never failed, and I just think it's so important for kids to be in front of this ability to make mistakes. And I think there's ultimately, I think there's good failure and good mistakes, and there's bad failure and there's bad mistakes. And by that I mean, on the one hand, if you fail or you make a mistake because of things that you didn't properly prepare for, or you didn't approach it in the right way, or those kind of things, but you can turn it very quickly into a really good failure, or a good mistake, if you acknowledge what your shortcomings were coming into what led to that failure in the first place. And so I think it's so important to think about failure as really, I think Truman Capote said that failure is the condiment that gives success its flavor. And I like that, because it's saying that failure it's not the beginning, or sorry, it's not the end state And it's not the only outcome. It's actually a big part of something bigger, and it's part of this journey. Or I hate the word journey because it's so overplayed, but it's something that gives that broader
It's part of the story.
ultimate success. Yeah, it is part of
It's
the
part of the
story.
story. And you're right. You got the quote right. It's failure is a condiment that gives flavor. Success its flavor. And you're totally right. Like my thought is that like if you're not exploring new ways of thinking, you'll always think in the same way, right? You know. So if we don't have a tolerance for like bad ideas, mistakes, and faux pas, it's like the most human thing about us, and we're not perfect, right? So, you know, not failing, I think, is very limited right here. So it has its role, right? Like just like you said, like there are things that we don't want to purposely go out there and fail, right? Like we don't want to fail people. There are consequences and things like that. And so again, not saying to go out there and just make mistakes for the purpose of that, but we're saying that you will make mistakes on the road to success, right? And it is part of the growth, especially as we strive to be better humans, right? Like failure is a great teacher, right? So let's flip it around to the other side then, right? Like with some of the like new paradigms and things like that you're seeing, or how do we handle failure? How do you think of failure? And how should we be going about it as individuals, as organizations?
Well, it's interesting that you and I, Pinaki, we talked about earlier this summer. Amy Edmondson announced her new book, and it's The Right Kind of Wrong: The Science of Failing. And I really like it because, or sorry, it's the science of failing well. I should say the science of failing. It's the science of failing well. And you and I, we've referenced Amy Edmondson a number of times in this podcast. But what I love is that we're starting to think about failure as a really important part of how we think organizationally. And I think this is part of this evolution that you and I are talking about in terms of how we start to grow and how we start to really lean into some of the mistakes that can be made in the workplace, and the evolved leader that understands that this is part of it. And so, for those of you that might not have heard previous podcasts, when we talk about Amy Edmondson, we're talking about a lot of the seminal work that she really does in this space of fostering an environment of psychological safety. And that is really helping organizations develop a culture where it's okay to be yourself, and you can have the courage to speak your mind. Obviously, in respectful ways. It's always important to be respectful of all others, but giving yourself a chance to come up with ideas, and not knowing if it's a terrible idea or a good idea, but feeling free to speak your mind without worrying that, oh man, is my manager going to think I'm really dumb because I had this stupid idea that wasn't well thought through. And when you go into brainstorming, the key fundamental characteristic of a great brainstorming session is you throw every idea out there, you throw them on a wall, see what sticks. Some of it's going to be terrible, some of it's going to be good, and that's where you find some of your best nuggets.
Yeah, it's so true, and I agree with that. Like the new paradigm shift here is that like we have to embrace and maybe even welcome failure into it. I remember a former creative director at Local Wisdom and I were talking, and we're talking about managing creatives and designers, and we had this conversation about how he used to allow his team to fail at design, right? Like they would go off on a concept and he knew it wouldn't work, but he wasn't like, what, don't do it, whatnot. He'd let them go off and do it, right? Because they have the idea and they almost have to like get it out of themselves to see if it works, right? They have to fail in order to learn. And that's part of our development at the company. So like we create a safe place to fail, right? And we have systems to back each other up. And I think that's going to be like key as we move forward, right? Because the pressures of not failing are too heavy, right? And so we have to get good at failing.
For sure. And Pinaki, I always wanted to ask you this, but we've talked about poker champion, Annie Duke. And, she's really leaning into more the theme of quitting and quitting in the best possible way. And one of the tenets that she has is she talks about how poker players have a good sense for when you're in a pot and you have a lot of your chips in this pot and you have a good hand, but it's clear that someone else keeps betting into this and they've got potentially a much better hand. Sometimes it's really, really hard because you're already so invested in this thing. It's hard to walk away from it, and so you try to bluff your way out, and you make a medium-sized problem even bigger. And I think in corporate cultures we see it all the time. Like there's a lot of pressure to be efficient with our use of resources, and if you go into, let's say, a project that, you go in with the best intentions and it's well thought out, it's defensible, a lot of money goes into it, a lot of resources go into it, it gets increasingly hard for organizations to stomach the idea of, we need to walk away from this. It's not working. And it's not that, the instinct often is to double down because we're already in this and we can't admit that we messed this up because we have to go back to the show.
There are organizations that have their projects that have been going on for more than 30 years in this constant state of failing and whatnot because of that scenario, which is fascinating and awing that actually happens. But it's true, right? I think Annie Duke talks about it in the book. Another book that I've read because, we all get into this mode of crap that did not go the way I wanted it to go. And, perhaps a lot of things that in succession didn't go the way I wanted to go. Right. So how do we pull ourselves out of that? One book that I would recommend in that is called The Dip by Seth Godin. It's a little book that teaches you when to quit. And it's a really quick read. But the idea is that all of these dips and failures and mistakes and things like that, you have the ability to catapult over it, use that leverage and momentum to catapult yourself. But then there are also scenarios where you're headed towards a cliff and you need to know that so you don't fall off and things like that. So those are things to really understand, right? Is this something that you could find something to latch onto and to give you purpose or give you something, right? I know football coaches used to always say to us, at the end of a hard, grueling practice, where would you rather be right now, fellas? And, we'd begrudgingly curse at them. But we won state championships that year, right? So it's we had to go through that grueling mess to get to that dip.
I think and I love that point about the dips and understanding that perfection isn't always what it's cut out to be either. And I know in the course of doing this podcast, I've never seen you angry before, but there was one of these episodes where the lawnmower in the back, I couldn't even hear it, but it was bothering you so much that I could see it was distracting you. But I think
it was totally distracting.
The point more being is that it's okay. I mean, why is it so wrong to have the sound of a lawnmower in the background of a podcast? I mean, honestly, we're doing a podcast, but
honestly, it might happen today. I don't know.
It might happen today. And the reality is, we all have lawns; they do need to get cut. But I think there's this innate need or this instinct for us to want to achieve perfection, and success is addictive. I mean, it is something that we do love. I think about some of these games that are available on our phones. It gives us a false sense of achievement or success. So it's
a lot of times that way.
Yeah, they're built to give you little tiny little wins, so that you have that nice little dopamine hit. And it's like the slot machines at the casino. It's the same thing. It's going to have bright lights and colors and sounds. And there is an innate need for us to feel those little wins and those little achievements.
It's such a beautiful analogy there because I think that's the way we need to look at failure, right? So if we kind of go, let's get a little bit more progressive at it, right? Um, let's not think about success as this like big grandiose thing that we have to achieve in like 3 to 6 months, over a timeline and a budget and a set of resources and things like that. Let's think about it as just small wins. I think about a lot when I think about like projects and work. I think a lot about like a startup environment. Like, well, how do we create a minimum viable product? How do we prototype something, test it, get it out there, and build it, right? Uh, right. We're afraid of fear, so we do spend a lot of time in researching and making decisions. Is this right? Let's just take a step forward and move something really small. Experiment. The idea is like fail fast, fail cheap to succeed sooner, right? So I'm an advocate of like, let's not ask people what they want, or let's not like overly think it. Let's just do a small experiment, right? And I think that's really cool. Like we could really easily build things. We could really easily try test things. We could do that, right? Because I think it was Bill Gates who said it, and I might be wrong on this one, but he said something to the effect that we at work um, overestimate what we could do in a year, but underestimate what we could do in 5 years, right? So I've seen a lot of organizations, I've seen a lot of leaders, a lot of managers, directors create this like big, massive strategic plan for the year. And it's just like we can't get to it. It doesn't get done. So I'm like, let's create something quick and fast and start and then learn from that and then build off of that. Let's get all of these like little dopamine hits to get out there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. And one of the things that I think is so fine. You and I, Pinaki, we've been talking about how important failure is, but I guess one of the things we should really talk about is, so how do we use failure to inform where do we go from here? You failed at something, because I mean, there's that legend of Michael Jordan being cut from his varsity basketball team in high school, and everyone eventually knows how it how it turns out. He ended up being a really pretty good basketball player.
Kind of good. He's kind of good.
But I don't know that people really know quite the whole story around that. I mean, yes, he was cut from the varsity team, but how many people actually really know how did he learn from this failure? How did he leverage this to turn it into a success? And part of the backdrop to this was that Michael Jordan was actually he wasn't actually cut from the full program. He was placed on the junior varsity team to develop more. And one of the things that with Michael Jordan is he was in his sophomore year. He was 5'10" at the time, and the varsity team actually really desperately needed height. And so, as competitive as Michael Jordan was, when he saw the two lists and he saw that his name was on the JV list, it was, of course, absolutely heartbreaking and devastating for him. But instead of quitting basketball, and because of his competitive spirit, he decided to commit himself, and eventually he became a star on the JV team. But from what I understand too, is that well before high school, I mean, his upbringing, his parents, James and Dolores Jordan, were very engaged parents, and they preached a strong work ethic. But I think that also contributed, is just having those parents that were there, always invested. I don't know if you've seen the new video on Amazon Prime, Air. Yeah, it's. I know our producer Brielle Saracini saw it, and it's a great. It's not actually about Michael Jordan at all. It's a lot of it is actually about his parents and how invested they were in just kind of getting the right setup for their son, Michael Jordan. And but the other piece to this is Matt Damon's character took a big risk in doing something that sneaker companies haven't done in the past, which is build a shoe around a star, right? So I think before that, most of the big sneaker companies would focus on their own shoes and then just find athletes to wear those shoes. And, this was the first case where they wanted to take this big risk and actually create a shoe specifically for one athlete. But a lot of interesting lessons there.
It is. There's a few things there, right, that to like unpack for the stories. Like one is like, how do you like learn and bounce back from like failure? How do you build resiliency, right? Is the one thing, right? Because like, what was it? Things like Walt Disney got rejected for a loan more than like 300 times before, he got the funds to build Walt Disneyland. Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling's, right? I think she got rejected like 12 times before they published Harry Potter, things like that. It just happens. And, I think that's one of the things that we have to like learn, and why failure isn't so wrong, because it's like we learn from it each time. Each probably one of those rejections gave them a step, something to like learn from, and then perfect the next pitch and perfect the next pitch, right? If you think about like success as like, we're, have to get to the second floor or the next floor and climb a flight of steps, then every step we take is a failure because it did not get us to success, right? So if you think about it, and like failure is just a step towards success, it's a whole different like mindset. And like I think a lot of times like failures, what happens psychologically, it kind of puts us to this like other place of like, crap, things are wrong. I'm wrong. I'm doing this wrong. Everyone around me wrong. The world is against me, and whatnot. And, parts of that could be true. And, however, like the reality of it is, but mentally we have to go from this like, oh crap moment to, okay, this is happening, to, okay, I could do this, to, all right, let's do this. And then like, let's get on to it, So there is this kind of level of like resiliency that comes from failure. There's a level of learning that comes from failure that's essential. Y'all know this. And just to like put it out there, some of the best inventions and craziest like world-renowned brands have come from just interesting mistakes and failures. This includes like the microwave oven, X-ray, Post-it notes. If you ever heard of like the story behind like the toy line Transformers, that's a whole other fun story and whatnot. And just kind of like how serendipitous mistakes and just trying different things created something crazy. The chocolate chip cookie was invented by mistake.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I love chocolate chip cookies.
Right? I mean, seriously, right? So, it's the way we have to think about it, right? So that's how I'm thinking about failure. That's how I think, we have to like accept failure, because it's part of humanity.
Yeah, and you know what, Pinaki, we're not saying that the goal is failure. In fact, far from. It's just acknowledging that sometimes failure and mistakes do happen, and it's important that organizations understand this to be part of the reality of the types of work that we often do. I know that there's circumstances where if there's a lot of time pressure, for example, or a lot of pressure on a specific project, that there's less room for mistakes and failure. And this is often the case in organizations. There's jobs that people have where, lives could be at stake, and failure really is not an option. But, ultimately at the end of it all, there's still failure, and sometimes there are mistakes that can happen. And I think it's just so important that organizations aren't shy about this or overly punitive about it, and they understand, okay, so let's take stock. Something didn't go the way we had planned, and really being intentional and purposeful about how do we make the most out of this. I guess it's life's giving us lemons right now. How do we actually turn this into a blueprint for the next time we do a similar project? Or how do we turn this into something that is an important lesson for us, right? Like so many people, they spend tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on a college education. And it's a big investment. And there's no real guarantees it's going to pay off. But we just do it because It's tradition. Everyone tries to go to college and they try to get this education with the idea that we can chase the dream now with this. But how many people feel good about, I'm going to invest $100,000 into this business idea, and why do they stop? And it's really because there's this huge fear of failure, right?
Yeah. Yeah. This is like social expectation behind everything right now. So if like think about failure as not necessarily even a failure, but a mismatched expectation and a different perspective on things, right? Because what I could view as a failure could be a success to someone else and all of that stuff. I think what's important, what you just said, besides that, was that don't get this, don't get this wrong. Like we're not, failure is not the same as carelessness, right? So we're not telling anyone to be careless and haphazard about everything right now, right? And if you do make mistakes, because it's going to happen, own up to it, apologize, say this is what I did wrong, this is what I could have done better, because that is your learning opportunity and that is your social way of putting it out there. Take ownership of it. And again, that's how you learn from it, right? So I think that's it. I think that's it for our episode of Why Does It Feel So Wrong to Be Human at Work. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I think this episode is again a special place in my heart, because if not for failure, I wouldn't be here. And at the same time, this is our final episode. So thank you everyone for tuning in. What's that failure that led you to your biggest growth? How do you handle failure? How is failure handled in your organization? Let us know. We're on LinkedIn, TikTok. You can email us at whydoesitfeelsowrong@localwisdom.com. Thank you for listening. Tell your friends. I'm Pinaki Kathiari, CEO of Local Wisdom and lover of Control Z. Joining me is my partner and challenger of the norm, Chris Lee, Vice President of Communications at Gallagher. We're here to ask you, why does it feel so wrong to be human at work? Let's give a shout out to Local Wisdom. Local Wisdom is our sponsor for this podcast. When working with Local Wisdom, they know that we plan and the universe laughs. That's why they've brought to you. That's why they've brought together a nimble and flexible team to help your company communicate to employees and their public. Check them out, localwisdom.com. Make sure you follow us. Why does it feel so wrong to be human at work? This is our last episode of the season. I want to take a moment to thank you all for being part of this fantastic adventure. Thank you for following us. I want to thank you, Brielle and SBS Productions, for helping us along and making us sound so good. Everyone, keep telling your friends, follow us, send us your thoughts. And Chris, special thank you to you for encouraging this, for pushing us to do this. It's been such a pleasure conversing with you for all of these episodes.
Yeah, likewise, Pinaki. It's been one of the most rewarding things I've done in my career, and similarly, I do want to give a huge thank you to Brielle, Vince, and the team at SBX, and most importantly to the listeners of this podcast for spending a little bit of time with us to kind of join us on our journey of understanding why it does feel wrong to sometimes feel human at work. And it's been such a great ride, and I'm just so grateful to be part of this, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everybody. Keep asking yourself, why does it feel so wrong to be human at work? And we'll start to make that change. Best of luck to you all. This is Pinaki and Chris.
Peace out.
See ya.